Hey everybody, Jake here from Bearded Gear, and I'm ready to do my full review on the Nitch Designs Ingress. Now this knife, if you haven't watched my unboxing or my first impressions of it, is actually not ready yet. This is a prototype. It is a pre-production version of a knife that is coming very soon. So I got to meet Nick, the genius behind Nitch Designs, and he handed this to me personally for me to check out and review. He's a local guy, which was very cool to meet him, get to talk to him. He also, in the course of me spending the week with this knife, was on the Everyday City Carry podcast with my buddy Ray, and I listened to that whole episode. And if you have an hour to kill or are interested in knives, like you probably are because you're watching this, you should watch that podcast because Nick's a really cool guy, and he's super open about all of his processes on creating this knife and having it produced and working with to get that all done and how his Kickstarter's working and all that kind of stuff. And I appreciate that level of just candid openness in the community because I feel like a lot of not just people but companies can be pretty closed off about the way that they're getting a project done, and that can make it really intimidating for people who may want to design a knife one day. I would love to one day design a knife. I think that would be so cool. And it's cool to have met Nick and to have had conversations with him, just he and I, where he's been so open, but then also to see that he's the kind of guy that's just willing to freely share that information. So check out that podcast if you're into listening to knife podcasts. Plus on YouTube you can watch it too, which is nice. But this particular prototype, I found out after I got it, was actually Nick's personal prototype that he carried and tested and used pretty extensively for a while. And it's pretty cool because the condition of this knife with the amount of use that he said he put it through is really astounding. The only real wear on the knife that I've been able to find anywhere is like one spot with a couple of little scratches on the satin of the blade. And he's like feather sticked with this knife, which I also did because he gave me permission to do so, and I wanted to see what this knife was really capable of. I should have done a video of my testing. I apologize that I didn't, but I've just had way too much gear that I need to be getting through because they're loaners and stuff, and I'm kind of on a timetable on some of these pieces of gear because they don't belong to me. This one included. It's actually going to Alex Knife Box next, so you'll be able to see his thoughts on it here soon as well. But I should have filmed it, but I didn't, and I'll at least describe to you all the stuff that I did with this knife because it's really impressed me. I also kind of made a deal with myself when I was doing my first impressions of this that I'd wait until my week was up and I would decide if I felt like I needed to get one for myself because they're on Kickstarter right now, and there's not that much time left, I don't think, in this Kickstarter round or however those work. So the answer, spoiler alert, is going to be yes. I'm going to order one of these. It's really impressed me in a lot of ways. And if you watched my unboxing, my first impressions, you'll know that this design, right off the bat, was a little much for me. I wasn't really behind it. Without reading the specs, I thought this knife was going to be way bigger and way heavier, especially, than it is. And I had all these preconceived notions about what this knife would be. And then as soon as I got it in hand, and then especially as soon as I cut something with it, it was like all of my judgments of how it looked and how I thought it was going to be were like so confirmed to be wrong. It's just really well thought out. Like you can tell when you hold this knife and when you use this knife that Nick is a really intelligent designer, and that he didn't just like draw this up and think it looked cool and then say I'm going to put it in production and hope it sold. He really designed this knife, and he designed it with specific activities in mind, which makes me appreciate it even more. I've mentioned this in my previous videos of this knife and in other videos lately. I've kind of been on a kick of it, but I'm really appreciating pieces of gear that are designed with a specific intent in mind. So if I am looking for a good outdoor folder, here's what I don't want to hear when I'm looking for an outdoor folder. In the description of the knife from the company who's making it, I don't want it to say something like, this is a knife that's just as home outdoors as it is in the office, or at your wedding, or like, as soon as they get to any kind of a description that would denote that it could be comfortable in a gentleman's carry, I stop being interested in it as an outdoor knife. Because in my opinion, those two things are better left separate. I'm not the kind of guy who has one or two knives, period, and I use them every day for everything, whether I'm going to a wedding or whether I'm helping a buddy build a fence. Like, I will carry drastically different knives for different occasions. And my outdoor folders, the knives that I, like when I'm not coming out here to film, but when I'm going to actually go out on a hike, the type of knife I pick to put in my pocket is going to be wildly different than the kind of knife I'm going to pick to put in my pocket on a day when I'm going to be wearing a suit and tie. I prefer to have pieces that are designed for those things. I have a knife that's so specific now that it's for fishing and kayaking and pool parties. Like, I have a wet occasion knife. That sounds weird, but gear makes more sense to me that way. And I think part of what makes gear fun for me is filling an application with a piece of gear. So it's like, there's this activity I want to do, or this trip I want to go on, or this new sport that I want to get into, or whatever it may be. And it's like, what gear do I need to make that as fun as it can be, and that can be as good for that purpose as I can make work. So I don't know how concise all that is, but I hope you guys understand what I'm saying. So the way that Nick designed this knife is what I like most about it. He designed this knife to be a realistic appraisal of what people are actually doing with EDC knives, and to fill that role phenomenally well. So in his mind, the way he described it to me, if I were to try to relate it to you, the average person who is going to be carrying a knife on a daily basis, the tasks that they're going to be doing realistically are going through things like cardboard, opening packages, things like zip ties. What else are people really doing with their knives on a regular basis? Maybe cutting through rope, depending on what they do. But for the average person who's carrying a knife every day, that's kind of the list of activities that they're doing with their knife. And that's fine. I think it's better that we can be honest about that. And if we can suit our gear to the activities we're actually doing, we'll enjoy our gear more. This knife, for those activities, is one of the best knives I've ever actually used. The looks of this knife, if I'm being completely honest, are still not something that's really like, I don't feel like it's necessarily my style. The design elements of this knife, the aesthetics of it. I don't hate it. I don't even dislike it. I'm kind of neutral on it. Lately, what I would consider more my taste are things that seem more restrained in their design, and this does not seem restrained at all. Look at this thing. This is not an exercise in restraint, design-wise. But what's cool is the more I've come to use this knife and learn about it by talking to Nick and just experiencing it, the more I'm understanding that I don't think there's anything design-wise on this knife that isn't functional. As out there as it looks, and as kind of different as it seems, every bit of this knife actually makes sense functionally, down to the engraving here on the sides for real traction without being overly gritty and grippy and sharp and unpleasant to hold or carry. It's a great way to give this really good grip, and I actually quite like it. This blade shape is bananas. The swedge on this thing, coupled with how tall it is, and then that we've got this warny with a perfectly straight edge, it just looks wild. But come to find out, the way that that swedge meets kind of like this harpoon hump here, for the way it relates to my thumb resting there, money. It feels fantastic. The tallness of this blade allows it to get really thin behind the edge. Like, for the tasks it's designed to do, it is an optimum grind. Amazing at cutting through cardboard. Amazing at cutting through rope. Amazing at cutting through paracord, tape. All of that type of material, it's one of the best knives I've ever used for it. It glides through that stuff. And then, with this tip, it's also pretty good at getting into zip ties and cutting zip ties and all of that kind of stuff. It works really, 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 really well. In addition to that, he's also designed this giant blade profile so that you could actually use the blade to hold on to and do really precise cuts. So something that doesn't happen all the time, but having a young daughter doing like craft projects and stuff, there are times when I need to cut out pieces of paper that are like specific little shapes and like detailed little things. And this kind of grip, I tried it this morning. It's fantastic for it. It's really, really nice to be able to hold the actual blade itself safely because it's so tall. And I can even use the hole a little bit to index. I can do all kinds of stuff to choke way up on this knife and use that tip in a really precise way. It's so well thought out. And so this blade goes from being like wildly, whoa, what's happening, to when you use it and when you actually take a realistic estimation of what's going to be done with a typical person's EDC knife, it's so well suited to all the tasks that it's supposed to face. Now, is this an outdoor folder at all? No, but it's not trying to be, and I'm so glad it's not, because it would be a worse knife if it was trying to do all of those things I just said and be comfortable out here. It wouldn't be better in that way. It really wouldn't. So I really, really dig that. One thing I will say that I can see an application for that it does overlap into because of this blade shape and these ergos and how locked in it is as a defensive knife, it could actually make a really good argument for itself. This blade profile, the straight edge with the warny tip, I've heard really good arguments for on a defensive knife. It makes a lot of sense to me. And the ergos, the grip, the way that this knife locks in, and the way it indexes the blade, which, by the way, I should have mentioned, where it puts the edge in relation to your knuckles for pushing down into stuff onto a flat surface is fantastic. But also, in a defensive application, it makes a lot of sense. I'm not a huge, like, defensive knives kind of guy. I own a couple, I guess, but it's not really like a passion of mine. But if you're somebody who it's very important to you that the primary knife you're carrying as an EDC has a really good defensive ability or has defensive design traits, then I could see there being a really good argument for this knife being that way. But yeah, it's unique, it's out there, but it's so well balanced. It's so much lighter than I thought it was going to be. Like when he handed this to me, he had the pouch, but he had this separate, I think it might have been in his pocket when he handed it to me. Anyways, when he handed it to me, he handed it over, and I feel like my hand went up when he handed it to me because I was expecting it to push my hand down, and it was so much lighter than I thought it was going to be. It's extensively milled out internally. Like if you look inside this knife, the internal milling is some of the best I think I've ever seen. It's got a really great lock bar insert, which also works as the over travel stop. The detent is really well dialed, and it's set up so that you can just middle finger flick it all day long. And you can, I did that bad, but you can thumb flick it open if that's your speed. It's just like, from a design standpoint, even though the aesthetics, like I said, are not my favorite, not particularly my style, the design of this makes so much sense to where I feel like I gotta have one. Because not only do I like Nick as a person now that I've met him and I've watched an hour-long podcast after spending half hour, 40 minutes talking to him in a parking lot, but now that I've seen like the fruits of his labor, the way it's really come together in this piece, I struggle to call things genius because that's like, I feel like I'm being too kind there, but it's really, really well designed. And so I appreciate it. And absolutely, I'm going to be jumping in on the Kickstarter and ordering one for myself. It's going to be exactly like this one. I'm going to get the satin blade. I think there's only two options, satin or stonewash blade, and then the handle is this way, either way. But this is a knife that would make so much sense to have in my collection and to be a knife that I reach for all the time when I'm going to be doing real EDC work, like real cutting through cardboard, processing it for the trash bin, opening packages, and doing crafts with my daughter, like the things I do more even than using my outdoor knives. And we probably all do, if we're being honest with ourselves. So kudos to him for making something that really excels in that application and is an honest assessment of what people are really doing with their knives. So I think that's about all I have to say about it. There's probably more I could ramble about, but the reality is I'm going to put my money where my mouth is, and I'm going to order one for myself because I want to have one. And not just because Nick is a cool guy. Genuinely, because after using it and experiencing it like I have, I just appreciate the design so much, and I can see the application for myself. I can absolutely, if I can justify spending more than this on knives that I use way less, the designed intention and how good it is at what it's designed to do, it all of a sudden like almost becomes a good value to me. These are, I think, $195 if I'm not mistaken right now on Kickstarter, and the amount of function that you get, the performance for what it's designed to do, it makes such a good case for itself in the market that we have right now. And that's terrifying. What is that? Oh, there was something on me. Anyway, that's one way to end this, I guess. This is the Nitch Designs Ingress, and I'm a fan. I wasn't before I handled it, if I'm being totally honest. I was skeptical of how this thing looked, and it has converted me, if you will. I really, really quite like it. So, there you have it.